We're starting and go. Hi, this is PowersSquared Raw and Real number 21.5, since the last one got totally foobarred, which we can talk about as an acronym that was made up and now has become a word. I'm M.A. Powers.
And I'm J.L. Powers. I'm coming to you live from New York.
And since this is a new version, we will get straight to the point. All right. So today we're talking about words that have been made up in our family or have been made up by in either one of our families. So and why we have done that. I think we can both talk about the ancient one that came from our grandparents that I always thought was a real word.
Well, before you do that, I wanted to say you came up with a vocabulary word called voblabulary to describe this phenomenon. Certain words that emerge in particular contexts with certain sources. Maybe your family, maybe your group of friends, maybe, you know, your schoolmates, whatever. And so our vocabulary from our family is very specific. So the one that you were mentioning about our grandparents, which was
hippocanorous. And I always thought that was a real word. And my understanding of hippocanorous is when we were really hyper and running around the house. We weren't being mean or bad. We were just going bananas and jumping around. And our mother would say, "You're very hippocanorous."
Yes, that is precisely how I remember it. I don't know how that word got coined, but it certainly describes very well, as far as I'm concerned, the phenomenon of being hyper as a kid, going crazy.
True. And I think Mom said that they grew up with it as a term, so it had to have come from one of our grandparents or our great-grandparents. But later on in life, found out it's not a real word. We're the only ones who knew of that word.
We also had other little things in our family. Maybe you remember some, but they were, I don't even know if they were the actual German words for things, but because Mom and Dad had spent some time in Germany, like she wouldn't call peanut butter. She called it Nussbutter. And I don't even know if that's actually the German word. Do you remember that? Calling it
kind of, a little bit, yeah. Not as much, but yes, I do remember there was some German stuff thrown around, since the Germans are actually famous for making up very long and complicated words just as for fun, kind of their form of humor. So
do you remember any other words from our childhood that were...
I don't remember any from our childhood. I have some from my family now. Okay,
what are they?
Well, one of them was Nora. Of course, this one makes total sense and we still use it, but at daycare when she was a little child, they'd always make her use hand sanitizer, and she conjugated that to Hanitizer, and that just made sense. So we've called it Hanitizer ever since. So that's a made-up word that just kind of, it's easier to say than hand sanitizer. So have you used the Hanitizer?
Yeah, well, these are fun kind of words. And you mentioned foobar, which has entered total social consciousness. Like,
right, foobar, or foobar is actually from the military, and that means effed up beyond all recognition. That's what it stands for. That was, an acronym, but it's now just common. We use it as a common real word. So these words that we make up eventually can become part of everyday vocabulary.
Yeah, you know, and I wonder why how some words jump from being, you know, words that are used just in one particular context to something that are widespread. And I guess I certainly can understand, like, I know some words from like the show Seinfeld, for example, entered consciousness and are now just common phrases. And that makes total sense. It was a very popular television show. But how do words that are used with small groups suddenly enter like widespread society, widespread.
Well, I mean, it's much easier in this day and age just because of the internet for things to spread, I think. I understand the military ones, it was easy because everybody was in the military at one point, you know, back our parents or grandparents met, some of them were in the military, so that kind of became a widespread known quantity. But I think I actually kind of like the colloquial type or very small when people make up their own in their own groups, you know, they have their own words and things, and you know you're part of the group if you know that word, which in one way can be an us versus them way, or it can just be, or you can think of it as being endearing, like in the family, like one of, between Annie and I, it's if you're Stober.
What does that mean?
Being sober is when you think that you're sober, but you're actually tipsy, and you're trying to convince other people that you're not tipsy, and so that's being stober. That happened because Annie, we were walking down the street in Salt Lake City after I'd had a few drinks, and I accidentally stumbled a little bit. So there's stumbling while sober would be stober, right? but she asked me, "Are you drunk?" And of course I meant to say, "No, I'm totally sober." I said, "No, I'm totally stober." So she's never, I actually was not drunk at all at the time, but there we go. There's the definition of being stober. Is
but
when
you had a few drinks.
When you think you're sober,
you thought you were sober, or?
But you're not necessarily entirely sober, then you must be stober.
That's a really good one. You know, there's also all these regional ones, and like, I don't know what there are in Maine, but in the Bay Area. Oh, okay. So I can think of one for El Paso too, but in the Bay Area, a common word is hella. So like, oh, I'm hella hungry.
Yeah.
You know, or I'm hella happy.
Yeah.
And in fact, good friends of ours, their little girl is named Ella, and she's called Hella Ella because, you know, that it's a Bay Area thing. But in El Paso, the word was chaffas. Do you know the word chaffas?
No.
Okay, so if you do something in a chaffas way, it means you do it kind of in a half-assed way.
Oh, really?
So like, oh, that's chaffas style. So like when we bought our house and suddenly everything, like it all looked great when we bought it. And then suddenly things started going wrong. Like the electricity blew out within the first week.
Yeah.
So clearly the wiring had been done chaffas style.
Yeah, gotcha.
We've had this consistent problem with the wiring into our bedroom for the light that hangs over the bed.
Right.
And we bought new lights several times, because if you buy a new light, it'll work for, you know, a month or two, and then it'll just stop working. Yeah. And you can change the bulbs, doesn't change the problem. And so that wiring is clearly chaffas style.
Right. Well, we have the only one that I can think of right off the hand. I know that there's a ton in Maine. I'm just not as familiar, but or a term that's used here, of course. This was used a long time ago, and they still use it, and they use it in ways that weren't as widespread. It used to be, you would say something was wicked cool. Mm-hmm. So they still use wicked in front of anything that means like very big. So they'd be like, Bahaba's wicked busy.
Those waves are wicked high.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that kind of, so they use that here. And so, you know, that might be New England, but I think it's particularly known for Maine. So.
Right. Well, you know, I think it is interesting. It is nice to have these sort of belonging words, and there's a comforting sense of it, as long as they're used, you know, not to keep people out. And
right. I think it is interesting though, because you always have a divide, and here's where it is. Slang becomes a common used word, but at the time the slang is often used by by a group of people, and it can be a generational divide where you have the young people corrupting the language using the slang, but they're in the know and they are in. And so if you don't use that, then you're not part of that particular group. I don't know how much that is the case now. And then as you get older, that slang kind of stays with your generation. And then the new generation of kids come up with a new slang, and it changes the tone and complexion of the way people speak and the way that language is used. And some people, from a sociological viewpoint, it's kind of fun to see people just talk very differently each generation, and it's kind of fun to see that progression. But on another hand, on another level, as more of like a linguistic scientific person, some people want to know that this word means this, you know, where cool now means something almost, it can mean that something is cold, but it also can mean that it's really cool. Like, this is really cool beer. If you say it that way, it means like you really like this beer, not that it's actually physically cold. Or if you say, this is cool beer, it's been in the icebox or whatever, you know, I don't know. You know, you wouldn't even say that anymore. You would say this is cold beer, right? So
well, in South Africa, they call sodas a cool drink. So because it's cold.
Right.
But yeah, it just depends on the context. But yeah, no, I mean, I think that, so of course some slang enters common lexicon and becomes just part of the vocabulary, like cool, whereas others quickly become dated and they're part of a generation. But it is a really good question, you know, the meanings to words and how much we can rely on common shared meanings about words. So for example, for you and me, the word evangelical has a certain connotation because of our history of growing up in an evangelical home but I know, like, even saying that we grew up in an evangelical home, like there's a lot of assumptions that people, the vast number of people who are watching us right now, are making about what that meant.
Right, exactly.
They're not accurate, right? Their definition of evangelical does not describe our home as we were growing up.
And that gets me to that other point that I was talking about, which is, do any of us really speak, even when you get on the microcosmic level of each individual talking to each other, does this individual, even though they're speaking English, and this individual who's speaking English, do they actually speak the same language? Because every word or phrase has a meaning that is contextualized to the person who has grown up with a certain way that word has meaning to them, right? Mm-hmm. And so this person could be saying one thing, and this person can hear those words, but it means something very different to this person than the person who actually said it, because the interpretation of that word is very psychological and very culturally normative. And so especially the further you get away from that one region and one family that you grew up in, do you actually speak the same language? Do you actually understand what the other person is saying? And I don't mean that, for me personally, of course we have to have some shared meaning and context, or nothing would ever get done. When somebody says, go get me the screwdriver, you probably know what they're saying, right? You're not going to go get them some bread. So there's definitely some common things. But the more complex we get with our language, when we're talking about things that are less specific, more things that are relational and emotional, then I think it can get, I think it's wise to remember that what we say and what the person here might be very different, because you might not actually be talking the same language.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I mean, obviously, we can make really easy. I mean, that one of the easiest things in the news right now is gun rights. You talk to somebody who is on the liberal end of thing, you say gun rights, they're going to be thinking a whole set of issues and things. If you talk to somebody who's very conservative and pro First Amendment and you talk about gun rights, they may be thinking of something completely different. Mm-hmm. Like, they're talking the same language, but their meanings are so different. Gun control is another thing. Gun rights and gun control, Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I will get you something to eat in just a second. And so I think that that's where it gets interesting is can we actually, the more we're in a bubble, you can say hi. The more we get into our own spheres and bubbles of influence, the less likely we are to actually be talking the same language, even when we talk to somebody from a different cultural background, especially when it comes to very politically divided groups, I think.
Right. Yeah. No, and I guess, I mean, I definitely am all about language evolving and being dynamic and not being static. But at the same time, I do recognize that we can't assume a common understanding of things, particularly when it comes to words with a lot of possible ideological content behind them. So,
great.
Anyway, we probably better end there so you can go get Owen a snack.
And that means being done, right?
Right. I think so.
All right. Well, see you later.
Yep. Don't forget to visit us at www.powersquared.com. See you next week.
Bye.